Welcome to Nuanced Beauty. This podcast is intended to be a spot where my husband Bill and I will capture some complex thoughts and challenge us to hold to our opinions loosely so that we can see the beauty in others and the beauty in ourselves. I want to challenge us to dive deeper into those everyday topics and those sticky topics that we might shy away from, or we might bulldoze over others with our opinions. Because I think there's wisdom in this idea that if we all thought exactly the same, there would be no need for anyone else. So let's have a conversation and let's get nuanced.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Nuanced Beauty.
Hi guys.
So, I saw a meme a while back that said every man reaches an age that they either need to get really into cars or really into World War II history. And there's no choice. Like every man at some age is really into one of those two things. And I didn't get into World War II history, but I have gotten a bit into just like history. I got like deeply into like American Revolution history, and then lately I kind of felt a draw because we were watching The Chosen about Roman history. And so if you start looking for books about Roman history, you find like volumes upon volumes of the decline and fall of Rome, and all like the Edward Gibbons volumes are 130 hours in audiobooks.
And that's the one that you checked?
Yeah,
and then you quickly returned.
Ain't no one got time for that. But what I did find is a podcast called History of Rome, which I've been really enjoying. And something that I found really interesting this week was one of the early episodes in the Republic where it all started in war. Like they were just war after war after war, and that's how Rome was. They were a big legion. It was mostly an army with a city attached to it rather than a city with an army attached to it. But at one point they had some peace, and there was a huge class war that happened between the publicans and the plebes about debt.
Did you say publicans?
I did.
And plebes. Those were their titles. Okay.
I might have that wrong.
That's
definitely plebes, because that was also a thing with our school. But
okay.
But yeah, it was the wealthy and the poor.
Okay.
Except in Latin. Over the concept of debt and debt slavery, because the way the laws were at the time, if you could not pay your debts, you would become an indentured servant of the person to whom you owed the debt.
Yeah.
And the problem with that was that you could literally never pay it off because you were too busy being a slave to pay it off. So if you ever got behind on your debt payments, your life was just ended.
A life of servitude.
You just became a slave for the rest of your life. And it was a big deal. Because it was a big deal because slavery's bad. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, but
not a lot of nuance in that discussion.
A little bit. Well, the different topic.
Are you going to defend that now?
No, I'm not going to defend slavery. But what I'm going to say is that slavery that is today looks different than indentured servitude. It still is it's questionable. It's
a whole nother
episode. Whole nother topic.
But there was also a big support our troops movement at the time, because a lot of these debt slaves were soldiers who accrued debt while they were off, fighting. And so really had no they're taking on debt so they could feed their families while they were off stabbing
people. They were in war. Okay.
And then couldn't pay it off and then went to slavery. And this is how we treat our troops. We're kind of seeing
some parallels.
We're seeing some parallels.
Yeah.
Between there was there was the populists essentially saying we need to not have this, and then there was the high class folks saying, well, if you took out the debt, that's your responsibility now, is it?
And the parallel here is, how do we feel about
student loan debt? Does that not sound about student loan debt? And we haven't on this podcast addressed a lot of big national topics,
national policy topics. Yeah.
We've kind of leaned more into what are the nuance in the little things, but this just leaped so out of my phone as I was listening to it that, wow, this is a 2,500-year-old story about student loan debt, essentially, where we
Yeah.
have one side, the wealthy and mostly older side, saying, "Well, you took on the debt, your problem, isn't it?"
Uh-huh.
And the younger folks saying, "No, the math doesn't work out. I literally cannot pay this."
Uh-huh.
And we come at this from a weird perspective because we went to a military school.
Right. And so our school, it was a federal service academy. And so we had to interview with Congress and senators to get a nomination, and we had to get an appointment for the school. And then we had to commission, in our case, we did a reserve commission for 8 years versus the other service academies, they do an active duty commission for a shorter length to fulfill their commitment. But so our school was primarily paid for with the exception of books and uniforms and such, which I had to take out
a generic
loans to
term
pay
called
for.
midshipman fees. That was just a
Yeah.
big slush.
Of admin, whatever.
Yeah.
Yes. So for the most part, like I only had under 10 grand
hmm
in the 4 years.
That's about what I had as well.
So we didn't get the brutal impact of taking out massive amounts of student loan debt. And also, I would just add from my side of things, like I didn't know that you could just get all this money in loans. Like just buying a $3,000 car was like a massive undertaking for high school. So this idea that you could take tens of thousands of dollars out in loans was not even on my radar as like possible. And I think that the fervor came just a couple years after us where everybody, it was just like common practice. But
I don't know.
I didn't know you could do that.
Well, I remember being told about Pell Grants and FAFSA, and I remember my parents saying that we made too much money to do that,
For you. Okay.
to get the subsidized loans.
Which is what I got.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I wasn't told, okay, cool. So in that case, you get these loans
There's these
instead.
other loans. Like
It was just like, oh no, we make too much money for you to get loans, but we don't make enough money to pay for school. So you're just hosed. It's kind of what I was told.
yeah. Okay.
So I'm like,
For just the college, like
yeah,
if you're
just
gonna do college.
like I had no way of funding college because I was, I guess, too rich to
Take
get
out
loans,
government loans.
but not rich enough to just have the money to go to college. So I just could not go to college unless I went
Unless
to
you
a
found a way.
military school.
Yeah.
And I was luckily
It's a good thing
I
for
got
us.
in. I got in. That would have been enlisting, I guess. Otherwise,
So that was my plan too, actually,
Yeah.
was to enlist. But so we didn't have the college loan debt, but we were reflecting on our senior year.
Oh, the good people at USAA.
USAA and Navy
Like
Fed.
they look at these
Senior.
young men and women who are dedicating their lives to service to their country, and think, these kids are missing out on the fundamental American experience of student loan debt. We can't let that happen to them, can we? No, we're going to give them student loans anyway.
We're gonna call them career starter loans
Which, okay,
with a very small percentage.
less than 1% interest.
Or yeah, it was 1 or 1.25.
It depends on the year.
And because most people, like the other academies, they all have to, they have to serve. They have to commission. So it's a guaranteed payback.
It's a guaranteed payback, but the thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that as an officer, you got to pay for your own stuff. Like they don't move you,
Right?
in the same way they would an enlisted man. They don't buy your uniforms. You have to buy your uniforms. You have to get your own apartment and all this. So
yes.
I make fun of them because like we thought we went to a school that we weren't going to leave with debt, and we actually left with like $90,000 in
Not
debt.
that much. It was 32 and 32.
And the other one that I guess
it doesn't count. Yeah.
Count. But whatever. It's still okay. 32 and 32. That's still 64.
64. So
for a school that was ostensibly free, we still left with $1,100 a month of debt.
Yeah.
payments.
So these loans were 5-year loans. So we had for these two loans, we had $1,100 a month of our income going to pay for these loans, and they were paid off in 5 years. Actually, faster than that because we paid them off sooner by just a little bit. But I would say, like, as we were talking about this, I do tend toward the camp of you pay for what you have. But I do acknowledge that people are preyed upon and like other things we're going to talk about in this episode. But the thing that came out of us talking about the career starter loans is that we don't know the impact, but we could say for sure that we tried looking at houses
Mhm.
like in those first 5 years of marriage, like year 3, year 4. And we would look at homes and we would conclude that we can't possibly afford this mortgage, in large part because $1,100 a month was going toward paying off these loans. So I have to imagine that we would feel like a similar impact had we had student loans.
Yeah, exactly,
Like,
and
it's relatable.
I think there's other weird things with student loans about variable interest rates and things like that. But
Mhm.
we can stand here on principle and say you made your decisions in life, and you should step up to the plate and own those decisions.
Yeah.
However, the nuance in that is systemically, we have a generation of people who cannot compete in the housing market
Mhm.
and aren't buying homes.
Mhm.
And because they aren't being competitive, the homes are being bought up. This is a totally different topic, but I'm going to go into it just a second anyway. Are being bought up by more and more corporations and not businesses,
Right, to rent and
and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
driving up the overall cost of home ownership.
Uh-huh. So there's that, but, like, so for me, like, the points that I would make in the nuance and the challenge here is that I would say to the old, and by old, I use that word loosely, to the person who sides with, like, it's your debt and you should pay it off, um, I would just challenge you to maybe bite your tongue for a second and have just a hint of compassion by the level of debt that is not, it's intangible. It's not tied to a car,
So
it's not
yes,
tied to a
it's
house.
it's an
Like,
unsecured
it
loan.
is useless debt in
Mhm,
that regard. It is not secured.
mhm.
And so
They can't repossess your
you
degree.
can't yeah, and so there is this heavy weight, and so even if you still conclude that that is your debt to pay, you can give the, like, moment
Well,
of pause to
I
see that it has an
I think
impact.
what a lot of folks miss in that conversation, in this the older generation, is that it costs way more than it
Used
did
to.
than it used to.
Uh-huh.
And I read this book and I highly recommend it. Might end up being the book that we recommend this week, called "The Boys in the Boat."
Mhm.
That was about the Olympic rowing team from Seattle in 1936.
Mhm.
The ones that went and just
From, like,
socked it to Hitler,
UW. Yeah.
Yeah, from UW. And as part of the narrative of the book, it follows a story of one of the kids on the team who was poor. Most of the people there were wealthy. At the time, only the wealthy could go to college.
Mhm. And rowing is a
Loans
wealthy
didn't
sport.
exist. Yeah, and rowing's a wealthy sport.
Uh-huh.
But this one guy was dirt floor poor, and he worked uh, building the Grand Coulee Dam in the summers to make his couple $100 to pay for that year of school.
Uh-huh.
So he got out of school without any debt because he could work a summer job and then pay it off. You can't do that. And
You can, but it's like it's not the norm. It's not the norm
I
at
don't know. And
all.
I want to look at. She's saying that because we have a
We
friend who
have
did it.
a
I
friend
want to see the
who
receipts because I
worked.
don't buy it. I don't
Well, but she didn't, she got a lot of grants,
scholarships and
scholarships.
grants.
Yes,
Yeah, and those things are
scholarships and
finite.
those things.
And it's just like you, we also didn't have student loans, but we can't say, oh, everyone should have went to Kings Point. Like that's not something everyone can do.
Feasible, yes.
That's a finite resource.
Right. Well, and like the component there that you were getting at with the cost is, I think when there was a really good it was a Dave Ramsey one that was called, like, it was about student debt. I'm drawing a blank on the name. It was like an 8 episode show, and it just went into how when the government started to give these FAFSA loans,
Hmm.
they were just writing checks like
Yeah.
left and right. And so writing those checks drove colleges to compete for you to go to their college. So
Hmm.
they started making freaking, like, lazy rivers and
Spas and
random amenities for
mhm.
college students to have a lifestyle to go to that college. And so some of that like the cost of your college went up in part because of that.
In part because of that, and in part because the number of administrators that are part of the school as well. I used to work for a community college,
Mhm.
and part of the constant debate, 'cause I was faculty, was the revenue split between admin and faculty, and it's so bizarre that most of the money went to the administrators, not to
Yeah.
the people teaching
Teaching
at the school.
the tangible,
Which sounds
yeah.
ridiculous because we think of school
Uh-huh.
as a place that you learn things.
Right.
But I think school has taken a different place in our culture as a vehicle for social services,
Mm.
which it's hard to say is a bad thing. When schools shut down for COVID, yeah, there's a little talk about learning loss, mostly from the conservative side of things. But the bigger issue was people who were like, no, some kids aren't going to eat
Yeah,
if they
2
don't go
meals
to
a
school.
day. Yeah.
Or uh, with the spike in kids with autism, like this
Mhm.
is a legitimate like
There are
child care social
special,
service. There's specialists, there's
like,
occupational therapists, there's
yes.
all of these that go with the school system. So it's really easy, and I see this a lot in the conservative circles that I roll in, scoffing at, oh, look at all these administrators. There's 132 DEI administrators at Stanford Law. And okay, DEI is a whole nother topic. But my point is, there's there actually
Uh,
is reasons that they have these administrators,
some of them.
and it's
Yes,
because
a
we
lot of them.
ask schools to do more than just teach people math.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is all of those services being subsidized by
Mhm.
student loans.
Mhm.
And then you, 17-year-old applying to college, get footed with this bill that
And
you have no way of
they
knowing.
approve you these massive loans to
No,
pay for it.
I
Like,
couldn't get a mortgage, but I could get a
but I
student loan. How
yeah.
ridiculous is that?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But then there's that other component is I remember chatting with a girlfriend back in Seattle, and she like got her master's in like mathematics or something.
Hmm.
And she's like, not a decade younger than us, just slightly younger than us. And she was chatting about some of the folks that went to college with her who are paying the bare minimum or
Which
not.
through COVID, the bare minimum was zero.
Yeah, either they're not paying or they're paying the least
Hmm.
possible, and they're going to hold on to these loans for like decades and
Hmm.
decades because of the hope
Hmm.
that their debt will be forgiven. And so the other coin of the challenge that I have is for anyone. We don't have that young of an audience for the most part, but if anyone is in that younger audience, you can't rely on someone else to take care
Well,
of your
you can't
debt.
expect the government to fix a problem the government caused. That
Yeah,
said,
the libertarian in us.
yeah, that's the libertarian streak in us. And also, you know, to just forgive people's debt doesn't solve the systemic issue of the student loans existing to begin with. All you're
Mhm.
doing is knocking down but not putting out the fire. It will reflash.
Yeah.
But I do think it's reasonable. We can discharge any kind of debt in the bankruptcy courts,
Mhm.
but student
But
loan
student
debt.
loan, yeah.
I don't understand that rationale because there are consequences. If you want to say, oh, you should suffer the consequences of your decision, well, there's consequences to going through bankruptcy.
Yeah.
There's major consequences,
Yeah.
but it's the right move for the right person. And
Mhm.
if you're drowning under 400,000 in student loan debt,
I would
that
add though that we're not financial people, so I can't entirely
I'm
like
not
you
saying
mentioned that statement, but I'm trying to recall like all the Ramsey episodes. Like I used to listen very regularly, and like I know student loans comes up, but I don't know if that's the only thing that you can't claim bankruptcy on. There might
I
be other
okay, I
things.
shouldn't say it's the only thing, but I do know
It's
for
one of the
sure
major.
that
Yeah.
you cannot,
Yes, that
and
is
there is
one.
no good reason for that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't yeah,
I
I
feel
don't
like
see
that's
that
the
either.
ultimate compromise position in should students pay off their student loans or should the government pay off their student loans?
Oh,
Because you're saying
yeah, that's a good point.
if you're
Like the
going to discharge
compromise
it,
would be to just change the rules so that you can
discharge
claim
it in bankruptcy,
bankruptcy.
and then suffer the consequences of going through
The
bankruptcy.
uh-huh,
Like you are
right.
going to have to own that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't get it. I do not understand. And the only thing I'm going to take off my tinfoil hat before I say the only thing I can think that could be.
The one other thing though, like that we were gonna hop into is that there's just this immense pressure to go to college. Like,
I didn't know that you could not. I thought you had to.
yeah, well, I mean, I knew you couldn't, but yeah, no.
I'm being facetious,
Okay. Oh, I thought you were saying
but
like from your parent and perspective. So my dad put a lot of pressure to go to
mhm.
college, but my mom didn't put any pressure to go to college, and I had plenty of family members who didn't go to college, and I have plenty of family members who have like master's
Mhm.
degrees. So I have a slew of like education levels for my like expanding family. Um, like not immediate family, expanding family. But we
Extended,
were
extended
extended,
family. There it
that's
is.
the word. But we were like talking about how like, it's kind of hypocritical for someone who's like on the wealthier side of things to be like, well, they don't have to go to college, while they're really like kind of hinting at that, like, well,
Yeah,
my kid's
yeah.
set up to go to
No
college.
one who says not everyone has to go to college is talking about their kids. No one's talking
Yeah.
about their kids.
Yeah.
I would put forth when I taught at the college level, there was a vast difference between the 18-year-old students and the
Mhm.
22-year-old students and the 42-year-old students.
Yeah.
And those kids that went right out of high school and right into college
The
because the
maturity
guidance
level,
counselor
the
told them
age.
to.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had students straight up
Motivation.
because we had the conversation on day one, like, hey, why are you here? So like I like boats, and the guidance counselor said that you have boats here,
This is a cool program. I should try
so
it.
I took out a loan, and here I am.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of those guys did pass. Like it wasn't a hard program, but
Yeah, 1 year
they
program.
didn't get out of it what they could have.
Right.
I had students who were older who got worse grades, but I knew learned more because
Mhm.
they gave a damn. So I actively do not want our kids to go to college when they're 18.
Mhm.
Gap year, gap 5 years,
Yeah.
whatever.
Go serve.
Work a crappy job.
Mhm.
Go serve, which is to say, go work a crappy job.
Uh-huh.
Um, get that sweet, sweet GI loan.
Uh-huh.
Uh, because I don't think I think we encumber young people with this massive amount of student loans.
Yeah, we've kind of set up this culture of like you're a kid until you're 25. Like, and that's just
Yes,
not true. Like, at least
but
we don't buy into that.
we don't buy into it in the infantilization of them.
Yeah.
But I do still think it's somewhat unfair.
The
The
mental.
predatory lending practices
Yeah.
of we're gonna say this is what you have to do. It's
Uh-huh.
not a big deal. Just sign the dotted line. It's okay. You're gonna make all kinds of money when you graduate, right? After you get
Right, right. It's a false, like, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's valid.
it's not that different than the payday lenders that they put in poor neighborhoods, and that
Mhm.
there are laws
Or right
that
outside of
govern
military bases.
right outside of military bases for sure.
Oh gosh,
There are
yeah.
laws that restrict predatory lending.
Uh-huh.
They don't lump student loans into it, and they should.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But it's like it's hard. So I'm hopeful though with the culture and college and with degrees. I do feel like I'm seeing more acceptance of somebody doing a 9 month, 12 month, 18 month technical coding, or like
mhm.
your program was a
Yeah,
one
taught
year
a 9 month
program.
program. Yeah.
Like I'm seeing more alternative, and by alternative I mean not the standard 4 year
hmm
degree or even the two
Well, yeah,
year
because I think the
associate
market
degree.
got so oversaturated with 4 year degrees that it lost its value.
Right. And I think that it not only did it lose its value, but I think we're headed in the right way by not like saying, well, the 4 year degree lost, so let's send them to school for 6 or 8. Like, I think we're
Yeah.
seeing a positive in the right direction rather than
hmm
leaning into more school.
Yeah.
We're seeing an acceptance of like actual work
And
experience.
here's the thing though, is that I do see value in liberal education.
Hmm.
I like to read
Yeah.
for funsies, and I do think it has value to me personally.
Right.
Is it worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? Or
Yeah.
as John Mulaney put it, I love how he put this. He spent 400. He was an English major, which meant he spent $400,000 for someone to tell him to read Emily Dickinson, which he didn't. Uh, so I do I used to
Appreciate.
scoff as someone who went to a trade school and had to take the bare minimum humanities classes
Yes.
to get the BS degree, and we just eviscerated those humanities teachers. I feel so bad for those people who were just we were just like be pecking at them like what do I need this for my career, which is not something that like freshmen in college are typically
Should be,
saying.
yeah.
That's what we were saying.
Saying to their
I had a
poor, like,
huge chip on my shoulder for a long time. And the
uh-huh,
big thing that softened me on it is when I got into, to bring it back to the beginning, started reading about history.
uh-huh,
And the biography of John Adams in particular made a
uh-huh,
strong case for liberal education. You should learn French,
uh-huh.
even if you never meet a French person. There's value in having that expansiveness and breadth.
Curiosity.
Curiosity, there's the word.
Yeah,
That's the
uh-huh.
word right there. There's value in curiosity and
Mhm.
seeking to understand other people.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a direct correlation to professional success,
Like
and
it could, but maybe it doesn't. Yeah.
maybe it doesn't. It's probably not worth the debt you go under, which is why children go serve. It's so easy to get a wiper's ticket. Go to sea, swab a deck, chip some
Yeah,
paint
that
for
would
a
be
year.
good,
I think it'd be
actually.
great.
That would be super
It's
cool.
really easy to get a wiper's ticket.
Yeah,
And
but
then after you've made a little money, or after you get that GI Bill, then spend Uncle Sam's money on that philosophy degree. I'm not against philosophy degrees. I'm against being in
in massive amounts of
lifelong
debt.
debt for
Yeah,
that philosophy degree.
yeah.
So,
So, yeah,
having successfully tied it all the way back to the beginning with the history buff statement, I think we can leave it there.
call it a day. So that's our thoughts on student loans and whose debt is it anyway?
Whose debt is it anyway? Thanks, everybody. All right, this is the part of the podcast where we recommend a book for this week.
Yes, and as a reminder, the intent is not necessarily to make this a book club or that you read every single book we suggest every week.
No, that'd be entirely too many books. All this is just coming from the fact that a lot of the conversations we've had and the conversations that we've wanted to share have come from books that we've read and topics that we enjoy. So, with all the books out there, sometimes it's hard to choose what you like. So, this is our contribution.
Yeah, and we generally hope that it ties in a little bit with the episode.
All right, everybody. As we mentioned in the main segment of the podcast, this week's book is going to be "The Boys in the Boat: An Epic Journey to the Heart of Hitler's Berlin." This book was recommended to me by an old lady who I worked with at Washington State Ferries, who sold it to me as a really great telling of what Seattle was like. Uh, in the infancy of the city. So this book takes place in the early 1900s, 1930 something. Obviously, the Olympics that it takes place in is 1936, but there's all the training going up to it. And what was fascinating about it is, well, threefold. First, what makes it germane to this podcast is uh, it follows the story of this poor kid who worked his way through UW and uh, found a community in this crew team, uh, which was tough because he was the only one who had a job. Everybody else was more wealthy kids. He had to work on the Grand Coulee Dam in the summers. He was a janitor at a YMCA where he was also living during the school year. He owned one sweater that he wore every day and got made fun of mercilessly for. But uh, it it's an interesting perspective on what college was in the 30s and how that differs from what college is now, both in terms of the cost but also the class distinction of it. That in a post student loan world doesn't exist as much. College isn't for rich kids. College is for everybody. So it's a very different perspective. Um, how they perceived college. The other thing that was interesting as a collegiate athlete myself, and I say that very loosely, I was on the team for some of my time at Kings Point. I was the backup long snapper on the football team, but still, sports was something that was very important to me, and specifically team sports. So, how this book talks about crew as an athletic endeavor and the teamwork and the community of it, the synchronicity between the rowers as they're moving. I really got excited and motivated. I got really into the idea of rowing crew for a minute. So it kind of brought me back to those days. But uh, lastly, and probably the most poignantly at the time, was this perception that Seattle was this backwater town. It was it was logging. It was a logging blue collar town. It was the Nazareth of the United States. Nothing good can come out of Seattle. It was as I'm living in Seattle at the time I'm reading this, and it's this modern cosmopolitan Amazon centric at the leading edge of innovation Seattle. It was so strange to see Seattle portrayed as it was not actually that long ago in the full course of things. I guess almost 100 years ago now, perceived as rural and rustic, uh, and in a big bad way less than. Uh, so again, playing into those class distinctions, that no way these kids from Seattle could compete on an international stage with something as highfalutin as crew, right? But they did because they were corn-fed mountain men from uh, the Cascades. It was just really narratively, and uh, the the images of it were really compelling. It's not a long book. I highly recommend it. The Boys in the Boat. Once again, The Boys in the Boat: The Epic Journey to the Heart of Hitler's Berlin, by Daniel James Brown. Check it out.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you aren't already following us, please follow us on your Spotify or Apple Podcast account. And look us up on Instagram at nuanced_beauty. Until next week.